2 years before Beatrice showed up at Caden's daycare, claiming to be his grandmother, she had stood in the doorway of her own house and told Thea, 8 months pregnant and barely able to stand, that the child she was carrying was not her son's, that she should collect her things and leave, that no grandchild of hers would come from a woman like that. Now here she was, standing outside Little Sparrow's early learning center on a Tuesday afternoon in October, telling the woman at the front desk that she was the boy's grandmother and had come to pick him up early. Thea got the call while she was still in her work uniform, halfway through a shift at the clinic on Division Street. She didn't even stop to take off her name badge. Thea had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Kingston's North End with her mom, Joan, who worked rotating shifts at a packaging facility, and came home smelling of plastic wrap and exhaustion. They didn't have much, but Joan made sure Thea always had a clean lunch packed, a warm coat for winter, and the understanding that being poor wasn't the same as being less than. Joan had raised her daughter alone, after Thea's father left when Thea was 4, and she'd done it without a single complaint, loud enough for her daughter to hear. Whatever grief she carried, she kept it somewhere private. Thea grew up watching her mother iron her uniform at 6 in the morning and still managed to make oatmeal before Thea left for school. She grew up knowing that love wasn't something you announced. It was something you showed up for. She was 26 when she met Ronan at a friend's birthday in the tragically hip bar on Princess Street. He was funny in a quiet way, and he listened when she talked, which she'd learned by then was rarer than it should be. They started seeing each other slowly, carefully. She liked that he called when he said he would. She liked that he remembered small things, that she didn't like cilantro, that she always got cold in movie theaters, that her mom's birthday was in March. After 8 months together, Ronan told her he loved her at a diner on Ontario Street at 2 in the morning over bad coffee and good pie. Thea had laughed and then cried a little and then said it back. She meant it. What she hadn't fully understood yet was what she was walking into. Ronan's family had money. Not Kingston wealthy, but comfortable in a way that showed. The house in Sydenham with the wraparound porch, the lake property in the Rideau, the way Ronan's mother, Beatrice, wore her pearls to the grocery store. Beatrice had been widowed young and had spent the years since building a small but profitable property management company. She was sharp, deliberate, and she had very clear ideas about what kind of woman deserved to marry her only son. Thea was not that woman, not in Beatrice's eyes. The first time Ronan brought Thea home, Beatrice looked her over the way a real estate agent sizes up a property that needs too much work. She asked where Thea's father was. She asked about her education, her job. She smiled at all the wrong moments. That evening, when Ronan went to help clear the dishes, Beatrice sat down across from Thea at the kitchen table and said, very pleasantly, "Ronan is all I have. I just want to make sure whoever he ends up with is right for him." Thea said she understood. She didn't say, "I'm sitting right here, I'm right for him." She wanted to, but she smiled and folded her hands in her lap and decided to give it time. She gave it time for almost 3 years. She gave it so much time she wore it thin. Ronan proposed on a Saturday in January, during a walk along the waterfront, when the lake was frozen out to the horizon, and their breath came out in clouds. He was nervous enough that he dropped the ring in his coat pocket twice before getting it out. She said yes, before he finished the sentence. The engagement dinner at Beatrice's house was the first time Thea understood that agreeing to marry Ronan meant agreeing to spend the rest of her life justifying herself to his mother. Beatrice sat at the head of her own table and discussed the wedding budget, the way a contractor discusses load-bearing walls, with the implication that her preferences were structural and non-negotiable. A small ceremony, nothing elaborate, the implication beneath every sentence being that Thea should be grateful for whatever she got. When Ronan pushed back, Beatrice looked at him with an expression Thea would come to know well. Patient, immovable, slightly martyred, she said she only wanted what was best. She always only wanted what was best. Joan came to the wedding in the dress she'd bought at a consignment shop in the West End and had altered herself. She looked beautiful. She cried when Thea walked down the aisle. Thea cried too. Beatrice dabbed her eyes once. Then she moved on to making sure the caterer had set the tables correctly. Moving into Beatrice's house had been a temporary arrangement, just until Thea and Ronan saved enough for a place of their own. That was what Ronan said. Thea tried to believe him. What Beatrice called helping, Thea experienced as management. The laundry had to be done in a specific order. The kitchen sponge had to be replaced every 2 weeks, not 3. The thermostat could only be adjusted after 7 in the evening. Small things, all of them. The kind that are too small to complain about and too constant to ignore. When Thea went to visit Joan, Beatrice made comments. When Thea came home late from a shift, there were questions that weren't really questions. When Ronan defended her, Beatrice would go quiet in a way that filled the whole house. Thea learned to move carefully. She learned to absorb. Then, Viveka came back. Viveka had been Ronan's girlfriend in his mid-20s, before she'd left for a graduate program in Vancouver, before she'd built a career in urban planning, and developed the kind of quiet, expensive confidence that comes from years of success. She'd grown up 2 streets over from Ronan. Beatrice had adored her. Beatrice still lit up when her name came up. She'd moved back to Kingston for a job with the city, and within 2 weeks, she was at Beatrice's dinner table, laughing at the right moments, asking about the right things, bringing the right wine. Thea watched it happen with the specific discomfort of someone watching a fire get closer without being able to move. "She's just an old friend," Ronan said. Thea believed him. That was the thing she kept coming back to later. She had believed him. Around this time, a new tenant moved into the small rental unit Ronan's family owned next door. His name was Eli. He was a nurse at Kingston Health Sciences, and he'd relocated from Ottawa for a 2-year placement. He was quiet, organized, and he started helping Joan with small things. Carrying groceries up her front steps when her back was bad, fixing a leaking tap she'd mentioned once in passing. He was the kind of person who noticed what needed doing and did it without being asked. Thea appreciated his decency without thinking much more of it. Beatrice noticed the arrangement and started making comments. She found reasons to include Eli in family dinners. She'd smile across the table at him in a way that Thea found inexplicable at the time. It didn't take long to understand. Beatrice wasn't being hospitable. She was building a stage. The night everything happened, Thea had worked a double and come home to the house barely able to think. She sat with Beatrice and Eli in the kitchen for a while, drank the tea Beatrice offered, and then excused herself to lie down. She didn't lock the bedroom door. She pulled it nearly closed, fell onto the bed in her clothes, and didn't know anything else until she didn't. When she opened her eyes, the room was bright. It took her a moment to understand why she felt the pressure of someone else beside her, why Ronan was standing in the doorway, why Beatrice was behind him with her hand over her mouth. Eli was asleep on top of the covers, still fully dressed, on the far side of the bed. Thea sat up and the room tilted. She hadn't had more than 1 cup of tea. She remembered the tea. She remembered nothing after it. What she said didn't matter. What Eli said didn't matter. The photograph that Beatrice had already taken on her phone, of the 2 of them appearing to sleep together, was what mattered. Ronan looked at his wife, and she saw something close in his face. Something she didn't know how to open. He told her to get out. She told him she hadn't done anything. He told her he'd seen it with his own eyes. She tried to explain about the tea. She tried to explain that she'd been too tired to even take her shoes off, that nothing had happened, that someone had put Eli in that room beside her while she was unconscious, and she didn't know how or why. Eli was saying the same things. Neither of them could reach him. Beatrice stood at the end of the hallway and watched the whole thing the way you watch something you planned. Ronan told Thea to pack what she needed. He said he couldn't look at her. She packed a bag. Her hands were shaking. She was 4 months pregnant. She hadn't told him yet because she'd been waiting for the right moment. Saving it, and the right moment had never come, and now there was no moment at all. She told him in the doorway, her bag over her shoulder, the November cold coming through the crack in the door. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said he didn't know whose baby it was. She left. Joan opened the door at 11:30 at night and didn't ask a single question. She just took the bag from Thea's shoulder and put her arms around her daughter, and Thea stood in the hallway of the apartment she'd grown up in and cried in a way she hadn't since she was a child. Not the polite crying she'd done in hard moments over the past 3 years. Real crying, the kind that hurts. Joan made tea, real tea, tea that wasn't doing anything to her, and sat across the table and let Thea talk until there was nothing left. Then she said, "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," Thea said. "I'm saying it so you don't forget it," Joan said. "Because people are going to say things, and you're going to have to hold on to that." Joan was right. People said things. The rumors moved through the neighborhood the way rumors do. Faster than the truth, slower to die. Women Thea had nodded to in the shoppers on Princess Street suddenly found reasons to look the other way. Thea heard fragments, saw them together, Something was going on for months, should have known what kind of person. She went to work. She came home. She ate what Joan cooked. She pressed her hands against her stomach in the evenings and felt the slow shifting weight of someone becoming real inside her. And she decided that whatever else happened, this was the thing she was going to get right. She went to the police to file a report. She wanted it on record. The tea she suspected had been tampered with, the arranged situation, the photograph taken before either of them woke up. The officer she spoke to was polite. He told her that without physical evidence of sedation, without a witness to what had happened beforehand, it was going to be difficult to pursue. She wasn't wrong, he said, but being right without evidence wasn't enough. She thanked him and left. That was the thing about what Beatrice had done. It was constructed carefully. It was constructed by someone who had spent years watching how things worked and how people judged, and who had made sure there was nothing solid for Thea to hold on to. Eli stopped by Joan's apartment 2 weeks later. He stood on the doorstep in his work jacket, and he said he was sorry. He said he'd met with Ronan. He'd told him everything he knew, that he'd had tea, that the next thing he remembered was Thea's alarm going off, that he'd woken up confused in a room he didn't remember entering. He said he'd told Ronan he believed someone had done this deliberately. Did he listen? Thea asked. Eli looked at her carefully. I don't know, he said, but I think some part of him knows something isn't right. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Thea gave birth on a Thursday in March, during one of those late-season snowstorms that Kingston gets just when you think winter is finishing. Joan drove her to the hospital through 6 inches of fresh snow and held her hand through 12 hours of labor and cried when the baby came, cried harder than Thea had ever seen her cry, and said, "He looks like you," even though he also, unmistakably, looked like Ronan. Thea named him Caden. She went back to work when he was 10 weeks old because she needed to, and because being useful helped her feel like herself. Joan watched Caden in the mornings, and a woman from Joan's church watched him in the afternoons, and the days were long, but they were hers. Eli checked in regularly. He never overstepped. He brought formula when Thea mentioned they were running low. He fixed the bathroom tap in Joan's apartment when it started leaking. He made Caden laugh by pulling faces across the kitchen table. Thea watched him and thought, this is what it looks like when someone is decent without needing you to notice. She noticed anyway. Meanwhile, Beatrice's house was getting quieter. Viveka had moved in about 6 weeks after Thea left. Beatrice had welcomed her like a daughter she'd always wanted, filled the fridge with things she liked, offered her the parking spot closest to the door, referred to her as family in conversations with the neighbors. Ronan went along with it the way he sometimes went along with his mother's decisions, half convinced and half resigned. The marriage, when it happened, was everything Thea's had not been. Large, elegant, photographed. Thea heard about it from a woman she used to work with. She was feeding Caden in Joan's kitchen when the message came through. She read it and set her phone face down on the table and finished feeding her son. After a while, she picked the phone back up and typed back, "Thanks for letting me know." That was all. What Beatrice did not know, what she had not considered, because she had spent so much time calculating everyone else's weaknesses, was the kind of woman Viveka actually was underneath the professional polish and the careful smile. Beatrice had seen someone she could shape. Viveka, it turned out, had been doing the same thing in reverse. The first sign came about a year into the marriage, when Beatrice mentioned to Ronan that some of the funds from one of the rental properties seemed difficult to account for. Ronan looked into it. The numbers had been moved carefully, through accounts that technically bore Viveka's name. When he brought it up, Viveka smiled and said she didn't know what he was talking about. When he pushed, she told him he could check with the accountant. When he checked with the accountant had retired, and the records were incomplete. The second sign came when Beatrice found paperwork she hadn't signed, property documents with her signature on them, agreements she had no memory of entering. She recognized the format from when Viveka had asked her to sign a standard authorization form for a property management update, assuring her it was routine. It had not been routine. The scope of it took months to fully understand. By the time it was clear, the company that Beatrice had spent 20 years building had liabilities attached to it that she hadn't known were there, assets that had been quietly redirected, and a name on several documents that looked exactly like hers. Viveka had been gone for 3 weeks by the time Beatrice admitted to herself that she wasn't coming back. Ronan was left with a marriage on paper, to a woman who had taken everything she could carry and left, a mother who had to sell the Sydenham house to cover a fraction of the losses, and a rental property next door to Joan's apartment that he hadn't thought about in years, and that now, in some financial untangling, needed to be dealt with. He saw Eli first by accident in the parking lot. He saw Thea a week later, on a Thursday afternoon in October, when she pulled up in front of Little Sparrow's Early Learning Center and found his mother standing near the front entrance with her arms partway extended, as if she'd already imagined the weight of a child in them. Thea got out of the car without turning it off. She stood between Beatrice and the door of the daycare, and the two of them looked at each other across 2 years and everything that had been done. "He's my grandson," Beatrice said. Her voice was different from how Thea remembered it, less certain. Thea looked at her for a long moment. "When I was pregnant, you said he wasn't Ronan's. You said I should take whatever child I was carrying and leave your house." She didn't raise her voice. "You watched your son put his hands on me while I was pregnant. You handed him divorce papers 2 months later. You never once asked if the baby was okay." Beatrice's chin moved slightly. "His name is Caden," Thea said. "He's 26 months old. He has Ronan's hands in my mother's lap, and he's never going to know your name if I have anything to say about it." She paused. "Go home, Beatrice." She went inside and picked up her son. In the car, Caden pressed both palms against the window and watched the parking lot as they pulled out. Thea watched him in the rearview mirror and felt something settle. That evening, Eli came by after his shift, the way he sometimes did. He sat on the floor with Caden and stacked blocks, losing patiently, rebuilding cheerfully. Joan made tea in the kitchen and hummed something Thea didn't recognize. A few weeks later, Ronan called. He said he'd spoken to Eli. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. He said Viveka had told him, the night before she left, that nothing had ever happened between her and Thea, that it had been arranged, that Beatrice had come up with it. There was a long pause on the phone. Thea said, "I know." Another pause. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that's not enough." "No," she said quietly, "it's not." She wasn't angry exactly. She was something more complicated than angry, something that had had 2 years to become something else entirely. She had loved Ronan once, genuinely, in the specific way you love someone when you're young and hopeful, and still believe that caring for someone is enough to protect what you have. She had been wrong about that. Not about him, really, but about what love could do in the absence of trust. He asked if he could meet Caden. She said she'd think about it. She didn't say no. She didn't say yes. She said she'd think about it, and she meant that she would actually think about it. Not say it to end the conversation, not say it as a soft refusal. She meant she would sit with it, the way Joan had taught her to sit with hard things, and see what came out the other side. Beatrice called once, on a Sunday. Thea didn't answer. She looked at the number and set the phone back down on the counter and went to find Caden, who had gotten into the Tupperware drawer again and was wearing a red lid like a hat, completely self-satisfied. She picked him up and kissed the top of his head. Joan came in from the living room and laughed at the lid and went to start lunch, and Thea stood in the middle of her mother's kitchen holding her son, and for the first time in a long time the word that came to her was not harder or more or enough. It was just, good. This is good. What Beatrice never managed to understand, what she had spent years being incapable of understanding, was that she had never been fighting the right battle. She had looked at Thea and seen a threat. She had seen a woman from the wrong part of town, with the wrong background and the wrong mother, and she had made it her mission to remove her. What she'd missed was that Thea had never been trying to take anything from her. She had only ever been trying to belong. Beatrice had thrown away a daughter-in-law who would have loved her, and replaced her with a woman who had systematically disassembled everything she'd built. She had gambled her family, her business, and her home on a belief that she knew better, and she had lost all of it. She was renting a small place off of Bath Road now, by herself. Ronan called her on Sundays. She had more time than she knew what to do with. In the spring, Eli asked Thea if she wanted to walk down to Confederation Basin with him and Caden on a Saturday morning. She said yes. The three of them walked along the waterfront in the early April cold, Caden in the stroller with a snack trap full of Cheerios, the lake still wearing the last gray remnants of winter. Eli didn't say anything significant that day. He didn't make any declarations. He just pushed the stroller when Thea wanted her hands free, and pointed at a pelican sitting on a mooring post, and bought her a coffee from a cart near City Hall because she'd mentioned she hadn't had one yet that morning. He was just there, in the way he'd always been there, without performance, without condition. Walking home, Thea thought about the word Joan had used years ago, sitting across from her at the kitchen table after the worst night of her life. Not fine, not okay. Joan had said, "You'll find your way back to yourself." She'd said it the way she said things she knew to be true. Thea looked at Caden's face, red-cheeked and serious, watching the street go by. She thought, "I did.